From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Ted Nesi. Tim White is on assignment this week. A bombshell in Washington earlier this week where a leaked draft opinion from the U.S. Supreme Court showed a majority of the justices poised to overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade decision that legalized abortion rights across the country in the 1970s. And that's where we want to begin our conversation today with our guest, Massachusetts Congressman Jake Auchincloss. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first, I just want to ask, I know as a reporter, I was stunned. It took me a second to realize what had happened, that a court opinion had leaked. What was your reaction when you saw the news?
It's a travesty. Court watchers were not surprised by the direction that the court is headed. I think dating back to 2016, a lot of experts were predicting that something like this would happen. All of us, though, were surprised by the degree that the court went here in its draft opinion, taking aim not just at women's right to an abortion, but really at the whole panoply of civil rights that have accumulated over the last 50 years. And Congress needs to act right now to codify Roe into national law, because regardless of what the final ruling states, we know that we cannot trust the Supreme Court to uphold Roe. Here in the House, we passed the Women's Health Protection Act last year, and that would guarantee every woman in America access to reproductive health care, as is their human right. The Senate has not even taken it up yet. Chuck Schumer has said that he will, and Americans deserve to see where their senators stand on this issue. But, Ted, you and I both know that it's not going to pass the Senate, and that's because of the filibuster. And at this point, I question whether you can be pro-filibuster and pro-choice at the same time.
Well, I want to talk more about that bill and kind of the legislative strategy, but just before we dive into the meat of it, I do have to ask, what do you make of the leak itself, which I think also shocked Washington, the idea of a fully drafted opinion leaking out of the Supreme Court? What did you make of that?
The leak is unprecedented in modern times, as you say, and it is true that draft opinions oftentimes change, and justices change both the tone, tenor, and actual even verdict itself as they debate it. It should not become standard practice in the Supreme Court to have leaks. I think that undermines the integrity of the institution. But that also should not be the story right now. The story right now is that Justice Alito thinks that he knows better than 170 million American women.
Well, let's talk then about abortion rights and where they go from here. First, I want to ask how you view Massachusetts and Rhode Island have both passed in recent years state-level laws codifying abortion rights. So to what extent, if this draft comes down as a pro-choice lawmaker, do you view this as largely an immediate concern in red states where abortion might be banned, but not as much of a day-to-day concern here in New England where state legislatures have taken action and it's going to go to the states?
There's a few things to unpack here. So first of all, you're, of course, right. Massachusetts passed the Roe Act in 2020. Took, I believe, 2 overrides of the governor's veto to get it done, but it got done. And that guarantees that Massachusetts women are going to have access to abortions regardless of what the Supreme Court rules. That's important. I'm also proud to say that the State House is looking to pass up to $2 million in funding to make Massachusetts a safe haven state, which is going to be critical because when the court overturns Roe, and unfortunately it's looking like a when, not an if, somewhere between 24 to 26 states in the union are going to have trigger laws that either immediately outlaw abortion or severely restrict access to it. And we're going to have to, working with organizations like Planned Parenthood, provide cross-state medical services to women in those reproductive health care deserts, as well as mail-order medications to women in those states. And Massachusetts can be a leader on this issue like it is in so many health care issues. However, I don't want us to be overly sanguine about this, because even in states that have codified Roe at the state level, there is a chance, given this draft opinion, that the Supreme Court could go even further and say that actually state-level laws that are legalizing abortion are themselves subject to judicial review, and other civil rights that we have achieved over the last half-century, same-sex marriage, access to contraception, for example, could also come up for debate, and that affects all Americans.
I think a lot of people, there are folks, even if they were shocked by the leaked opinion this week, that still sounds radical. That still sounds beyond even what, because there was, as you said, a lot of talk that Roe was on the chopping block now that President Trump had secured a conservative majority. The idea of them going all the way to contraception state-level laws still feels, I won't say it's a scare tactic, but feels like it's beyond where they would go.
I think we're going to see in the midterm elections whether or not your point resonates with the Democratic base or whether they do view this as an alarm bell in the night. But make no mistake, there is a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court that given the tenor of this draft opinion, is throwing into question a whole series of civil rights that have been interpreted into the Constitution, that are not explicitly drafted into the Constitution, that they do not think have historical standing. And it is a highly subjective determination of what has historical standing and what doesn't, but we should not rest on our achievements. We are seeing, for the first time really in my lifetime, a right be rolled back. What are the next rights?
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the Women's Health Protection Act. You mentioned it before. You voted for it last September. It's the bill Democrats support to codify a statutory right to abortion. Just yesterday, Maine U.S. Senator Susan Collins, Republican, who is pro-choice, said she can't support that bill. She thinks it doesn't protect the rights, for example, of a Catholic hospital not to perform abortions. You know, as you said, the filibuster is in place. There aren't the votes to overrule the filibuster, which means you need 60 votes right now in the Senate to pass anything on abortion. And you would need someone like Susan Collins. Should Democrats be revising the bill you passed in the House to try to win over a Susan Collins, a Lisa Murkowski?
If there were a path to 60 votes in the Senate to codify Roe, of course we should be working to get those votes, because this is a critically important issue, and there is no such thing as letting perfect be the enemy of the good right now. We need to deliver something for Americans. So absolutely. But there is no good faith debate on the other side of the aisle right now. We're hearing Susan Collins, one of the 50 that we would potentially need, offer a few ideas on the margins. It's just clear that the Republican Party does not want to protect women's control over their own bodies right now.
I have to say, as a political reporter looking out, there aren't the votes to overcome the filibuster. There aren't even 50 votes for an abortion bill right now, let alone 60. Republicans are in strong shape to take back the Senate, if not this year, in the next cycle or two. It's hard to see a path where Democrats can get the numbers they need legislatively to do something on abortion rights even in the medium term.
Well, voters are going to decide who holds the House and the Senate, and this issue, I expect, will be a galvanizing one, because the stakes are so clear right now, and the Republicans are so crystal clear about where they stand, and that they stand out of step with the majority of Americans. 6 months, as you know, in politics is an eternity. Mm-hmm. Are we facing headwinds right now? Yes, we are. But we need to reinforce what Democrats are delivering: a record job creation recovery, return to normalcy after 2 years of the pandemic, strong, able statesmanship facing global challenges.
Record inflation.
Critical inflation issues that are causing real pain at the kitchen table, but Republicans have yet to present a plan of action to counteract it. They are playing political football with it. I'm the vice chair of the Financial Services Committee. We deal with this issue day in, day out. I've offered a suite of suggestions that Republicans could join on to. All we hear is I'm trying to take on talking points. We are working right now on the America Competes Act. That's investments in the supply chain, in manufacturing and workforce development to help make America more productive. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates. There's no overnight solution to inflation. Americans know that. But Democrats have a plan, Republicans have a tax.
But, you know, let's go to inflation, because, you know, Democrats passed the American Rescue Plan Act last year, $1.9 trillion. And when I've asked other Democrats this, they say, and look at all the good things we put into the American Rescue Plan Act. But you listen to economists, a lot of them say that was maybe more money than this economy could handle, especially with the supply chain issues we have. One of the first votes you took, I believe, do you, in retrospect, think that bill was too big based on what the economy's done since?
I think we were facing an unprecedented crisis, and there were two options there. One was go small and deal with the effects of it being too small. And we saw what happened when we did that with the Great Recession back in 2008 and 9. It was too small, and the economy staggered for years with slow growth, slow job creation. Or it was risk going too big and cutting childhood poverty by 30 to 40%, having record job creation, investing in state and local infrastructure, and yes, potentially heating the economy up a little bit. The real driver of inflation, though, right now, is the fact that we've had a pandemic for the last 2 years. The world's largest supplier, China, has shut down its economy, which has roiled supply chains. We've got a war between two countries that are huge exporters of oil and wheat, critical commodities. And at the same time as America is recovering and demand is surging, supply chains are compressed. Hence the America Competes Act. We are investing directly in domestic supply chains and workforce productivity, and we are going to get back to a place where we can have growth without inflation.